Okay, good day, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. We've got a great topic for you today. I'm Rick Vanover, Senior Director of Product Strategy, and I'm joined by.
Melissa Palmer. I'm a senior technologist on the product strategy team.
So we've got a great topic for you today, and we
Is
love
it is it a great topic though? It's like one of
It's good.
those.
Yeah, good point. We have a show. Let's say that we have a great show for you today. And one of the things we love about these broadcasts is the incredible amount of people that we get. So in the feed, drop in where you're from. We'll give a shout out to the location. So I've got Christian helping us out on the social media side. So let us know where you're from. We'll drop a little shout out. So the topic today is ransomware. All right. This is a really big deal. I think that when people look at the backup product industry, the fundamental insurance policy that we provide that you want to cash in if there's an issue, get you out of problems like ransomware. And my goal, like my specialization on our team, is to really help bolster resiliency. So we've got some content prepared. We're going to jump into that right now. And we have this basically as a quarterly report. And this is really important. This is a quarter by quarter view on the state of ransomware. We want to help you be equipped to be resilient to win this battle. So Melissa's got a great technical background. I've got a good Veeam background. She's got a good Veeam background too, and I'm a little bit technical as well.
What's a Veeam? No, just kidding.
Well, I'm just, the green stuff, but let's jump into it. So, the state of ransomware today, I want to highlight, if you didn't know, there's 3 modes of entry. I think that knowing where ransomware comes in from is actually one of the most important things you can do. So RDP, or remote access, I was shocked to know that more than 50% of ransomware threats enter through remote access. That blew my mind, Melissa. I don't know if that kind of
that is kind of high, because you would think people would have things locked down in such a way that couldn't happen, but apparently not.
Because I kind of grew up with the ransomware threat thinking it was all fish email.
Right. Somebody opens the email. Oh no, what happened? Look, my whole computer's encrypted.
Exactly. And then we have also documented evidence with vulnerabilities. You might remember the WannaCry ransomware strain was actually from a vulnerability that was patched for years when WannaCry was out there. So if you think about common sense on email, think about patching and updating, which we should be doing anyways, and then securing remote access technologies, that's really going to knock out the top 3 attack vectors. And if you're not familiar with Coveware, they produce a lot of really good research about those modes of entries and how they track over time. But rather consistently, RDP, or remote access technologies not done so well, are the most popular modes of entry. So the practical tip to pivot that is to make sure you're using some form of 2-factor authentication for things like remote desktop, especially for your backup infrastructure, right? Ransomware can behave a number of different ways. It can encrypt data, it can go and delete data, it can extort data. So when you think about these threats and the state of it today, we have to really be prepared for all these different types of behaviors that we might be dealing with. And I think that it's important that when you go to prepare against the threats from an educational standpoint, you know what these threats are. So that being said, I love going and talking to our Veeam support team. I think there's a great perspective of having to deal with the threatscape out there today. And for those of you who are practicing IT professionals, if I was doing this presentation in person, I'd say, raise your hand if you've ever had a ransomware incident. And if you wouldn't raise your hand in that, you would be shocked to see how many people to the left and to the right of you would. It's really amazing. We've actually restructured our support team to help deal with this specific threatscape. So number 1, they've given us advice. Number 2, they have a specialized team on how these threats are managed and supported. And number 3, that's important to you. If you're in a ransomware situation, really think about who do you call to get out of that problem. So they have 3 pieces of advice that I want to share with you. One is, one of the best modes of protection is to have 1 or more copies of the data, including something that's ultra resilient. Now, Melissa loves it when I make up words. Is that a
This is one of
defined
my
word?
favorites. This is one of my favorites that you invented, Rip.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite words, it actually makes good sense. And I have a definition slide here in a bit. But I also think that, when we talk about scenarios where things don't go so well, it's usually because there's not multiple copies of data and there's not an ultra resilient copy of data. So for those of you joining, please drop in the chat where you're from. We'll give a shout out. Again, sorry about the blip, but live is live, and that's how we roll. Oh, looks like we've got India. We've got Florida, Calgary, UAE, Brazilian living in Bucharest, Spain, Philippines, Buenos Aires, and France. Bienvenue. Vendredi soir. What else would you do on a Friday night? This is a party. Welcome. So thanks for joining. And the last two pieces of advice from our support team are permissions and hardening and separation. And those all kind of work together. But you've heard from security professionals this phrase of the principle of least privilege. That works here in Veeam. Think about using documentations for your backup infrastructure of explicit minimal permissions and separation from the network. Don't have internet access. We have some resources that we're going to get to here at the end of the show, but this is the advice from our support to help you win. But one of the best things we can do is have some detection. And so, Melissa, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I really just need like a whole hour to talk about this and what Veeam can do. But the fact of the matter is, if you have Veeam 1 in your environment, or you have Veeam Availability Suite and you haven't quite gotten around to installing Veeam 1 yet, or you installed it and you're like, here's some really compelling things that you can look at inside of Veeam 1. So first and foremost, we have 2 canned ransomware detection alarms out of the box, right? So the first one looks at network utilization and disk I/O, right? 2 good indicators of, hey, maybe something weird is going on with your VM, right? And beyond that, you can actually edit these alarms and add more parameters or adjust your thresholds. So for example, the other alarm that we had in version 10 added was suspicious incremental backup size, right? Because if you've backed up a VM and it's been ransomware, all those files change. So we see a big backup increment. That's a really good indication that we should go take a look, right? So that's another big one. And I think the default threshold is to trigger on 150% over the usual. But again, you can customize these alarms to your environment. Now, going a step further, Veeam 1 is really powerful in that it's looking at your VMs and what it's doing all the time. You can use these alarms as a baseline or create totally new ones to really look at what's important for you and your applications. For example, Veeam 1 Business View allows you to group applications intelligently. So you could build a business view group of a certain application, monitor it, run some reports on it over a month or so to get a good feeling of how this application acts, and then create custom alarms to alert you when something's happened that's not in the expected parameters of these VMs, right? So that's a really good way to see, hey, something's going on in our environment, and Veeam 1 will alert you. Veeam 1 can even go a step further with something called a remediation action. So you can basically have Veeam 1 do whatever you want when it encounters an issue. For example, if you had this suspicious incremental backup alarm trigger, you could take action that made sense to you in your environment. You might want to say, hey, if it's outside of business hours, because I'm running my backups outside of business hours, I just want to quickly disconnect that VM from the network, add a little PowerShell script in there to do that for you, and send an alert to my administrator so they can log in and take a look and see if there is actually ransomware there or not. So again, you can kind of make Veeam 1 do whatever makes sense for you and your environment, and it can really give you a good baseline of what's going on in your environment and let you know when the parameters have changed, indicating maybe there's some suspicious activity going on.
Yeah, that's a big deal, Melissa. You hit on the remediation actions. That is really a gateway to the art of the possible that can really do a lot. Yesterday's Veeam 1 tip of the day, for example, catch of the day, was using the alarm called VM without a backup.
Oh, that's my favorite. That's one of my favorites.
Some of the remediation actions have very specific built-in flows.
Yes.
Like that one was.
So we have a lot of predefined alarms. We have 10 predefined alarms that actually have those remediation actions built in. So Rick, in this case, I think you have a bunch of different options. Add it to a backup job and run it, or just add it to a backup job to catch the next run, start a Veeam zip job. There's a ton of things built in when this alarm is triggered.
Yeah, and then even do it automatically or do it and ask for approval. So this,
Exactly.
you don't have to be a script wizard to go in and really enjoy the remediation actions. So no, it's great stuff. So if you haven't checked out Veeam 1, by the way, it's available in Veeam Community Edition. Even the free edition has the ransomware activity alarm. So it looks for the past 24 hours. So that's something to check out.
Absolutely.
So buzzword bingo. I use this phrase, ultra resilient backup. If those of you on this show, if you remember one thing, remember that your most effective specimen to beat ransomware is having an ultra resilient backup, if you remember anything. So what is that? That's a word I made up. It's a type of backup storage that is inherently resilient against ransomware. And the wonderful thing is there are 4 classic specimens that have that resiliency against ransomware. And then there are 2 kind of other use cases which you can pull in as well. So I'll go through them. So Melissa, pick one. Which one of the ultra resilience should I start with?
Start with immutable backups, please.
Yes, exactly. Going the modern way. It's at the bottom of the list because it's the newest one to this soiree here. But immutable backups is a very important technique. So this is kind of a word that actually came from Amazon with S3. The S3 buckets, there's a capability for those objects inside of there to be resilient, so you can't delete them, right? So if you think about ransomware going after the Veeam console and knocking the backups out, if you think about even a malicious administrator or accidental deletion, these are also similar mechanisms where this immutable backup in S3 will really help you be protected. And then working backwards, I think also offline or air-gapped type of storages are effective as well. So tape and rotating hard drives or removable media, those are specimens. In fact, this computer I'm talking to you on now, once the physical agent backup job runs, the external hard drive's ejected, so it's offline. And then when I reboot, it's back on and it'll be subject to more backups. But those are little effective techniques that can make a huge difference. And then I want to give a shout to my service provider community with Veeam Cloud Connect. If you're not familiar with that, that's basically a backup repository in the sky that you would throw your backups to, storage provided by a service provider. In cloud definitions, I call it BSaaS, backup storage as a service. One of the inherent resiliency techniques with Cloud Connect is insider protection. This is a copy of the backup data completely out of band from the tenant or the user. So accidental deletion, ransomware, malicious administrator, that will not be exposed to those threatscapes. And you have to call the service provider to expose that data, and then you can restore it. And I also want to give a shout to some of the ultra resilient snapshot types, think of NetApp SnapLock or Pure Storage Safe Mode snapshots. And there are some other types of snapshot technologies that are inherently resilient as well. And then lastly, some of the replication technologies as well. And the caution here with replication, we want to have different authentication frameworks and such. Okay, so we've got the map coming up again. Oh, wow, we got New Hampshire, USA. I know somebody up there.
We know someone there.
South Carolina, Peru, Bienvenidos, Columbus, Ohio, Canton, Ohio, Egypt, Poland, Bavaria, Germany, Algeria, Turkey, Alicante, Sweden, Tucson. I know somebody in Tucson also. Italy and Saudi Arabia.
That's a really good representation. Wow,
awesome. Especially those in EMEA and the Middle East. This is, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else on a Friday night.
This is a great show to enjoy with an after dinner drink, perhaps. Just saying.
Well, I know you like Pellegrino.
Yes.
So there we go. So let's talk about some of the other techniques that we can use as well. And that's
absolutely
sure backup.
Sure backup. So one of the things that I actually started playing with Veeam as soon as I got to Veeam was sure backup. I learned a lesson very early in my career, pre-Veeam days, right? And I was worried about, the speeds of my backups and how long they were going to take to run. And this was the beginning of my career. And it was all I was worrying about until someone said, Melissa, who cares how long it takes? Who cares if they run? Can you actually recover from them? And that kind of made me pause because, no one ever talked about, could I actually recover from my backups? It was, well, did the job complete? Did you miss your backup window? That was the things that everybody was drumming into my head as a VMware administrator, right? But the truth is, it doesn't matter how fast your backups are. It doesn't matter if they've actually run or not if you can't verify they actually work. And Sure Backup does just that. Sure Backup is another type of job that you're going to run. There's a couple of configuration things we're going to have to do. Go in there, make a quick little Veeam virtual lab appliance, create an application group. That application group is any kind of supporting VMs your app might need. So if I need, AD, DNS, stuff like that, I throw that in my application group. And what it's going to do is essentially start our VMs or our application for us in an isolated bubble. And it's actually going to restore it for us and go a step further and actually check, that the VM came up and running okay, that our OS is responsive, that our app is running. And then it's going to send you a report afterwards letting you know that, hey, just so you know, you can actually recover for your backups. You've got a really good backup here. You can go a step further and choose to leave your kind of virtual lab environment running to make use of our on-demand sandbox. So if I know I'm going to run a Sure Backup once a week, maybe I'll leave it running for my app team to go in there and play around a little bit and take a look at things. Maybe they want to test an application upgrade. Maybe they want to test some of those really critical security patches. After the Sure Backup job or the on-demand sandbox is done, poof, everything's gone. You've never impacted production the whole time.
Yeah, that's really important, is about the on-demand aspect, Melissa, because this is a technique where behavior can be verified before the restore. Exactly. And this is really important because Sure Backup is this very versatile technique. We call it a data lab in some areas of the Veeam world. But the thought is, it was initially meant to verify that what we backup is indeed recoverable, and then you automate that right after a backup is taken, ensure it's recoverable. But in a ransomware kind of response scenario, I've always lived in a world where I want to shorten the time between ransomware introduced and then its behavior is known. So detection. This could be a detection technique. If the ransomware behavior manifests itself on the next boot, if the ransomware behavior causes an application not to start as you would expect, this could be a technique where you could catch that. So a really great use case. And then the on-demand aspect, before you throw it back in, is it going to behave? That leads us to our next technique here that is also a really good way to confidently reintroduce data.
Exactly. And this use case is, well, what if we do know where we are ransomware, or we highly suspect that we have been ransomware? How do we recover our VMs and recover clean VMs and verify that? That's where our secure restore comes in. And we have a couple different options. In a nutshell, what Secure Restore is going to do, it's going to start restoring your VM, but then it's actually going to run a virus scan for you. And you have a couple of options. If everything's clean, great. We're just going to restore to production. Everybody's happy. If we do find malware, we have a couple choices to make. Do we want to proceed with recovery but disable network adapters? Can't talk to anything, but we might want to go in there, maybe check things out, do a little forensics, see what's really going on. Or, we can just scrap it, abort VM recovery, and go back to an earlier restore point and see if maybe that one wasn't ransomware.
Well, and that's only part of the thing. This might predicate that maybe we'll go a different route, and we'll talk about this here in a second, like a different type of recovery, right? Because they each have their own behavior characteristics. So wouldn't it be great, Melissa, if I could combine the Sure Backup, data lab, and the secure restore? What would that look like?
So we actually have an option in Sure Backup now that we can get the best of both worlds. During our Sure Backup, we can actually run the antivirus scan. We can make sure that our VMs are indeed clean, which is just a great way to combine the best of both worlds, and maybe even detect ransomware before anything else. Maybe it's just sitting there dormant and it hasn't actually started to do anything yet. This is a great way to catch it.
Yeah, and the kind of important thing to note on the malware scan is that this will be against the latest definitions of an antivirus tool that is deployed on your Veeam infrastructure. And that's a really good opportunity to maybe use different tooling. For example, in the data center or on this set of workloads, maybe I'm using Windows Defender, but maybe in the data center in the Veeam infrastructure, maybe I'm going to use ESET and I'm allowed to update all the time. So I can maybe use different tooling. And this is a very easy way to consume this type of comfort level in the data. When we get to the paper here in a second, when I talk about the data integration API, I told a story in the white paper about you can use a data integration API to do a scan as well. And that includes also PCs and laptops, thinking about that. But then also another behavioral thing with like Total Commander, you can go look for encrypted files. So you may not have the actual ransomware, but you may have its behavior. So there's so many different mechanisms and techniques here with Veeam on this ransomware resiliency and preparedness and recovery that we really are working hard to give you this information. And that brings us to a good question from Robert. Robert says, Sure Backup tests network ports like TCP and UDP. How does it assure that the application is running, such as websites, web apps, Exchange, and others? So good question, Robert. So at face value, that Sure Backup job in particular, the application group will execute checking what applications you've defined. SQL 1433, Mail 25, Web 80, 443. But if you don't trust that, if that's not enough, if you want more, you can actually drop in a custom script. Now, I'll tell you a story, Robert. When I first was telling the story about this capability when it was made early on in my journey here at Veeam, I had somebody didn't want any part of what I was talking about, didn't believe it at all. And he went in the lab and played with it, and I really appreciated that individual's effort. He put in a SQL script to do a check DB. If you're familiar with like T-SQL commands, that's a very low-level check of the database integrity for a SQL server. That individual followed up with me, passed the test. That person was happy. So you can drop in custom scripts as well when you think about custom apps, especially if you have one system that's like really, really important. That would be a good one to work on the custom app, because then that paves the way for so many other things. If you're ever in a ransomware situation, you already have Sure Backup ready to go. You already have the application script tooling in place. This can be a very effective resiliency technique for you. And then speaking of effective, this is an area where I think Veeam is really, really powerful, and that's multiple restore mechanisms or modes. And Andrew on our team loves to make the infographic. I have it on the wall up there, but there's so many ways to recover with Veeam. A lot of times people just gravitate to, I'm just going to bring the whole VM back. And
I think that's what we're used to, especially if we're used to doing things different ways or maybe with different products. Hey, I'm just going to restore the whole VM and then go in and get what I need. You don't necessarily need to do that with Veeam, right? You can get exactly what you need and not waste time, effort, or resources restoring a whole VM when you just need that one Excel spreadsheet the CFO deleted by accident.
Sure. And like file level recovery for that specific file is a great example, but you could also have scenarios where an operating system has the behavior of ransomware, but the data, say file data, is fine, or SQL Server databases are okay. I'll just use Veeam Explorer to restore those, etc. You have a lot of different ways to get out of that problem. In fact, over 80 restore scenarios. Really, really powerful with Veeam Availability Suite.
And can anybody name all 80 off the top of their head? That's what I'm wondering. I know I can't.
Oh, well, Andrew probably can, because I gave him the project. Back when it was like 42 and 36, somebody got me at VMworld, fitting that this would have been VMworld this week, but somebody came up to the booth because I was dropping those numbers like I do. And they said, name them. It took me a while, but I got them all. I think it was like the 36 or 42 area. So like V7 era. But one more question from Robert. He says, if you're using Veeam Agent for Windows, can you still utilize Sure Backup? Good question, Robert. Not currently, but you can use the data integration API. So once we get to the resources that are part of this ransomware prevention kit, one of those in here is the white paper. That white paper that I wrote actually goes through that example, Robert, just like that. I actually take my Veeam Agent for Windows backup, because if you think about the endpoint, that's a great introduction space for ransomware threats. I'm using the data integration API to do a malware scan and an encrypted scan. But again, the art of the possible, you could go in and do things like scanning for credit card numbers, social security numbers, PPI, or maybe something that's really relevant to your business. We got more from the map. Wow, thanks everyone. We got Colorado, Connecticut, NSW, Australia. snap, Morocco, Netherlands, Brazil, Carroll Stream, Illinois.
There's a lot of green on that map.
Whoa. Well, green's my favorite color. Calgary, I think I forgot to mention that. I might have just said Canada. That's not nice because it's Calgary. So excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Great stuff. But the ransomware prevention kit that we have here, this is a really good place to start, right? We have a webinar we've done. The white paper, I really put a lot of effort into that, going through A to Z, what you can do with Veeam to help be resilient against ransomware. But then also there's a link to download a trial of Veeam Availability Suite, which is a great way to get started.
And remember, Veeam Availability Suite, if you're not familiar with it, that's Veeam Backup and Replication. That gives you all the powerful backups and restores. And that's Veeam 1, the tool I talked about a little bit more earlier that you can use to actually kind of baseline your environment and do a little ransomware monitoring. Completely free for 30 days to try and really super simple to set up.
Indeed. And I think the Veeam 1 part of it is very underrated. You know, Melissa talked about the remediation actions. There's also this whole other thing about intelligent diagnostics, a lot of really good resources for you to check out. So we've had a great show here today. I want to give a quick plug to Monday's show. Dave Russell and Krista McCumber from the Evaluator Group, one of the stronger analyst firms out there. I love Krista. She's a great resource in the community, multi-cloud expert. They're going to talk about the 2020, landscape backup and beyond, right? What is that going to look like from a trends perspective? And I think that's really important. And I look at what Veeam's doing, what the customers are wanting from the market, and I can't wait to tune in for that. On behalf of the whole Veeam Global Marketing team and Melissa, thanks for joining me today. That concludes today's stream. Have a good day, everyone.